We've been told since childhood that being smart is the golden ticket, that intellectual ability is the ultimate predictor of success. Study hard, get good grades, land the dream job, achieve the good life. A straight line from A to B, yet here you are. Intellectually capable, quick-witted, able to grasp complex ideas that leave others bewildered. Perhaps you were the one who never needed to study as hard as your classmates. The one who could see patterns and solutions that others missed. And yet, something isn't adding up. Because despite this intellectual horsepower, you might find yourself staring at others who seem less intellectually equipped, yet somehow racing past you on the highway of life. The classmate who struggled with basic concepts now runs a thriving business. The colleague whose insights never impressed you just received another promotion. The friend who never read the books you devoured now lives the life you privately envisioned for yourself. You're smart, but the success you expected hasn't materialized in the way you thought it would. This isn't just your story. It's a pattern I've observed repeatedly in our achievement-obsessed culture, a peculiar disconnect between raw intelligence and tangible success that rarely gets addressed honestly. Today we're going to unravel this paradox. Not with empty platitudes or motivational cliches, but by examining the hidden mechanics that create this intelligence success gap. Because the truth is both humbling and liberating, being smart isn't enough. In fact, sometimes it's precisely what holds you back. Let's begin with something counterintuitive. Intelligence can function as a trap. The very mental abilities you pride yourself on might be subtly undermining your progress in ways you haven't recognized. Consider what happens when you're naturally quick to understand things. You develop a relationship with learning that's fundamentally different from others. When comprehension comes easily, you never develop the resilience required to push through intellectual roadblocks. You've rarely experienced the productive struggle that builds mental calluses. Then life inevitably presents you with problems that don't yield to immediate understanding. And suddenly you're in unfamiliar territory. While others have years of practice persisting through confusion, you find yourself unequipped for sustained intellectual discomfort. The person who has always had to work harder than you has been unknowingly training for exactly these moments. This creates what psychologists call the ease addiction, a dependency on quick comprehension that makes us avoidant of anything requiring prolonged mental effort without immediate payoff. We gravitate toward what comes easily, where our intelligence is most visible, and shy away from domains where mastery would require us to feel incompetent for extended periods. Look at your own life. How often have you abandoned pursuits where you didn't demonstrate immediate aptitude? How uncomfortable are you with being the least knowledgeable person in the room? How quickly do you retreat when something doesn't yield to your understanding within a time frame that feels acceptable? But there's another, perhaps more insidious trap that intelligence sets: the seduction of potential. When you're told throughout your life that you're capable of anything, that your intellect makes all doors potentially open to you, you become vulnerable to what we might call potential paralysis. The weightiness of all these possibilities creates an immobilizing pressure. With infinite options theoretically available, the cost of committing to any single path feels excruciatingly high. What if you choose wrong? What if your vast potential is squandered on a suboptimal path? The person of average intelligence feels no such burden. They choose a direction and move forward, accumulating actual experience while you accumulate hypothetical futures. Meanwhile, you remain frozen in the paradox of choice, intellectualizing your options rather than embodying any particular path. Your smart friends recognize this pattern in you, the tendency to remain perpetually, almost ready, eternally preparing, forever on the verge of beginning in earnest. And here lies another uncomfortable truth. Intelligence often expresses itself through criticism rather than creation. It's far easier to identify flaws in existing structures than to build something new that can withstand similar scrutiny. You might excel at diagnosing problems, pointing out inconsistencies, and identifying weaknesses in arguments. This critical faculty serves certain professions well, but it can become a liability when building anything requires the vulnerability of creating something imperfect. The most successful builders I know possess a willingness to be wrong publicly, to produce work that reveals their limitations, and to learn through iteration rather than preemptive perfection. They understand that success doesn't come from avoiding criticism, but from creating something substantial enough to be worth criticizing. Ask yourself honestly, do you spend more time evaluating and critiquing than creating and contributing? Has your intelligence become primarily a tool for judgment rather than generation? But there's yet another dimension to this puzzle, one that few discuss openly. Intelligence often feeds an insatiable need for intellectual stimulation that can actively work against sustained achievement. Consider how the intelligent mind craves novelty. New ideas, fresh challenges, and intellectual variety provide the dopamine hit that keeps your mind engaged. This creates a natural resistance to the repetition necessary for mastery. While the average person might contentedly practice the same skills for thousands of hours, your mind rebels against this monotony, constantly seeking the next intellectual frontier. Yet true expertise, the kind that translates to tangible success, rarely comes from intellectual variety. It emerges from cognitive compression, doing the same important things repeatedly until unconscious competence emerges. The concert pianist plays scales for decades. The writer writes daily, often covering similar ground. The entrepreneur faces the same fundamental challenges year after year. This repetition feels like intellectual death to many smart people. They chase new projects, new fields, new challenges, maintaining their stimulation but diffusing their impact. Their knowledge grows horizontally rather than vertically. They know something about everything but rarely enough about anything to translate it into extraordinary outcomes. Look at your own pattern of interests. How many projects have you started and abandoned? How many subjects have you studied briefly before moving on? How many skills have you developed to the point of mere competence before your attention drifted elsewhere? This isn't necessarily wrong. Intellectual exploration has its own rewards. But if external success is your measure, this pattern virtually guarantees underperformance relative to your cognitive abilities. And now we arrive at perhaps the most painful insight of all. Intelligence often functions as a substitute for action rather than a catalyst for it. For the intellectually inclined, understanding becomes a form of accomplishment in itself. Reading 10 books on entrepreneurship feels productive. Researching optimal exercise routines seems like progress toward fitness. Analyzing the psychological dynamics of relationships feels like movement toward emotional fulfillment. But understanding without application creates the illusion of progress without its substance. Knowledge without implementation is merely entertainment disguised as growth. Meanwhile, people of modest intellectual gifts are busy taking imperfect action. They start the mediocre business that eventually improves through market feedback. They follow the decent exercise program consistently rather than researching the optimal one indefinitely. They navigate relationships through direct experience rather than theoretical understanding. Their success emerges not from superior strategy, but from superior contact with reality. They spend less time thinking about life and more time living it. Ask yourself, how often do you substitute learning for doing? How frequently do you prioritize understanding over experience? How much of your intellectual activity is actually a sophisticated form of procrastination? But there's another dimension to this intelligence paradox that's rarely acknowledged: the relationship between intelligence and identity. When you've been praised primarily for your intellect throughout life, being smart becomes core to your self-concept. Your sense of worthiness becomes entangled with being the person who knows things, who understands quickly, who has insights others miss. This creates a profound vulnerability. Any situation that threatens this identity, any circumstance where your intelligence might not shine or might be legitimately questioned, becomes existentially threatening. You avoid precisely the situations where growth happens, where you might fail, where you might be wrong, where your current intellectual tools might prove insufficient. The average person's identity isn't contingent on being the smartest person in the room. They're free to take risks that might make them look foolish, to ask questions that might reveal ignorance, to enter domains where they can't rely on intellectual advantages. This freedom allows them to accumulate exactly the experiences that lead to success. Look at your own patterns. How comfortable are you admitting what you don't know? How willing are you to venture into arenas where your intelligence offers no special advantage? How much of your life is organized around protecting rather than expanding your intellectual identity? This brings us to the social dimension of intelligence, another blind spot for many smart people. Intelligence often creates a subtle disconnect from others, a sense of being fundamentally different that can manifest as mild alienation. This alienation commonly expresses itself in two problematic ways, either as intellectual arrogance or as persistent insecurity. Either no one understands me because they can't, or no one understands me because something's wrong with me. Both mindsets create distance in relationships and obstruct the social connections that facilitate real-world success. Success rarely happens in isolation. It emerges through networks of relationships, through social capital, through the accumulated goodwill of others who connect you with opportunities, vouch for your character, and support your endeavors. Yet intelligence, especially when it becomes a primary identity, often interferes with the vulnerability, reciprocity, and genuine interest in others that builds these critical relationships. The most successful people I know aren't necessarily the most intelligent. They're the most connected, the most trusted, the most liked. Consider your own social world. Have you built deep, mutually supportive relationships? Or do you find yourself perpetually on the outside looking in? Do people experience you as genuinely curious about them, or primarily interested in demonstrating your own insights? How often do you find yourself feeling subtly superior to or alienated from the people around you? This brings us to another crucial distinction that many smart people miss: the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Intelligence is the processing power of your mind. How quickly you learn, how well you reason, how easily you manipulate abstract concepts. Wisdom, however, is the operating system that directs this processing power toward meaningful ends. Intelligence without wisdom is like a powerful car without a skilled driver. The vehicle has tremendous capacity but might be driven in circles, toward dead ends, or off cliffs entirely. The raw horsepower matters far less than the direction it's moving and the terrain it's navigating. Wisdom involves recognizing the limits of rational thought, embracing uncertainty, distinguishing between intellectual entertainment and genuine insight, and aligning your choices with your deepest values rather than your temporary desires. The wisest people I know aren't necessarily those with the highest IQs. They're those who have developed nuanced mental models of reality, who understand both the power and limitations of their own minds, who can hold contradictory ideas simultaneously, and who recognize that some of the most important truths are paradoxical rather than logical. Ask yourself honestly, have you developed wisdom commensurate with your intelligence? Or have you primarily focused on becoming smarter rather than wiser? Let's now confront perhaps the most fundamental misconception about success itself, one that particularly ensnares intelligent people. Success is not primarily an intellectual problem to be solved. It's a complex adaptive challenge that involves your entire being, your emotions, your body, your unconscious mind, your relationships, your environment. Yet intelligent people often approach success as though it were a chess problem or a mathematical equation, something that yields to pure mental effort. They attempt to think their way to outcomes that require much more than thought. Consider the intellectual who can brilliantly analyze the dynamics of procrastination, but still finds himself paralyzed when facing important work. Or the person who can articulate with perfect clarity why a relationship pattern is destructive, but finds herself repeating it nonetheless. Or the smart professional who knows exactly what career would fulfill them but remains in soul-crushing work year after year. These aren't failures of understanding. They're disconnections between different aspects of the self. The intellect knows, but the emotions haven't aligned. The conscious mind recognizes, but the body hasn't integrated. The rational self sees clearly, but the unconscious follows older programs. Success emerges not from perfect understanding, but from integration, from alignment between your various selves. And this integration doesn't come through more thinking. It comes through embodied experience, through emotional processing, through environmental design, through practice, through relationship, through all the non-intellectual dimensions of human existence. Ask yourself, how integrated are the different parts of your being? How well do your emotions support your intellectual insights? How aligned is your environment with your conscious intentions? How consistently do your actions reflect your understanding? But there's another factor at play that particularly affects the intellectually gifted, the challenge of psychological leverage. Every strength, when overused, becomes a weakness. And when you're highly intelligent, you naturally tend to overuse your intellect, applying it even in situations where other approaches would serve you better. When faced with emotional distress, you analyze rather than feel. When facing uncertainty, you gather more information rather than build comfort with ambiguity. When confronting failure, you seek to understand it perfectly rather than simply trying again with slight modifications. This creates a peculiar inefficiency. You're like a bodybuilder who develops enormous arms while neglecting their core, legs, and back, strong in a specific capacity but fundamentally unbalanced. And like that bodybuilder, your overall performance suffers despite your specialized strength. The most successful people I know aren't the most intellectually gifted. They're the most psychologically balanced, able to think deeply when thinking serves them, but equally able to feel fully, to act boldly, to connect authentically, to persist tenaciously, to adapt flexibly. Ask yourself, how balanced is your psychological portfolio? Have you developed your emotional intelligence alongside your analytical abilities? Your intuitive capacities alongside your logical ones? Your comfort with uncertainty alongside your drive for understanding? Beyond these individual factors lies a broader cultural context that particularly disadvantages intelligent people in the pursuit of conventional success. Our educational systems and early developmental environments predominantly reward intellectual ability. The child who excels at tests, who raises insightful questions, who demonstrates superior comprehension receives continuous affirmation. This creates a powerful conditioning. Be smart, gain approval. This conditioning persists into adulthood, creating professionals who orient their entire approach to work around being seen as intelligent. They optimize for demonstrating their intellectual grasp of situations rather than for producing tangible outcomes. Yet in the professional world, results trump comprehension. The ability to execute imperfectly but repeatedly overshadows the ability to analyze perfectly but intermittently. The capacity to coordinate practical action within constraints matters more than the capacity to envision ideal solutions that never materialize. Consider your own work patterns. Do you prioritize being right over being effective? Do you optimize for intellectual elegance or practical impact? Do you secretly seek validation for your intelligence rather than focusing exclusively on outcomes? This brings us to a critical paradox of achievement. Success often requires intelligent people to make peace with strategies that offend their intellect. Let me explain. The intelligent mind naturally gravitates toward complexity, nuance, and comprehensiveness. It seeks to understand all variables, to account for all possibilities, to create perfect systems. Yet success in most domains comes from simplification, from focusing on the vital few factors rather than the trivial many, from consistent application of fundamental principles rather than perfect optimization of every parameter. The most successful people I know maintain what we might call strategic simplicity. They identify the core drivers in their domain and focus relentlessly on these, willingly accepting suboptimal outcomes in less critical areas. They embrace useful heuristics rather than seeking perfect models. They reduce reality's complexity to actionable simplicity. This approach feels intellectually unsatisfying. It leaves too many loose ends, too many unconsidered factors, too many theoretical objections. Yet it works precisely because perfect understanding isn't the goal. Meaningful progress is. Ask yourself, how comfortable are you with strategic simplicity? Can you willingly ignore fascinating but ultimately distracting factors to focus on the essential few? Can you act on partial information when waiting for complete information would mean missing opportunities? Let's now address a factor that particularly undermines intelligent people: the challenge of expectation management. When you demonstrate exceptional intellectual ability early in life, you create expectations, both external and internal, about what your future holds. These expectations become a hidden burden, shaping your decisions in ways you might not fully recognize. You don't just pursue opportunities. You pursue opportunities worthy of your perceived potential. You don't just set goals. You set goals that will validate the exceptional future that was predicted for you. This creates a paralyzing perfectionism. If your intellect is your primary identity and source of worth, then your achievements must reflect this specialness. Ordinary success feels like profound failure. Paths that might bring genuine fulfillment get rejected because they don't match the narrative of exceptionality. Meanwhile, people without this burden make choices based on simpler criteria: what they enjoy, what provides sufficient security, what aligns with their values. They're free to pursue happiness rather than exceptionality, and paradoxically, this freedom often leads to greater achievement in the long run. Consider your own relationship with expectations. How much of your striving comes from genuine intrinsic desire versus the need to validate your intelligence? How many opportunities have you rejected because they didn't feel special enough for someone of your intellectual capacity? How would you live if you were liberated from the burden of fulfilling your exceptional potential? Now, having outlined these numerous ways intelligence can obstruct success, I want to be clear. This isn't an argument against intellectual development. Intelligence remains a tremendous asset when properly deployed. The question isn't whether to be intelligent. It's how to ensure your intelligence serves your broader aims rather than unconsciously undermining them. So what does this look like in practice? How do smart people achieve the success that has eluded them? First, recognize that intelligence is a tool, not an identity. When being smart becomes who you are rather than something you possess, you become imprisoned by this self-concept. Practice separating your sense of worth from your intellectual capacity. Cultivate a self that transcends your cognitive abilities. Second, develop metacognitive awareness. Start noticing how your intelligent mind operates, its tendencies, its biases, its reflexive patterns. Where does it serve you? Where does it obstruct you? This awareness creates choice where previously there was only habitual response. Third, deliberately cultivate the capacities that intelligence doesn't automatically develop: emotional regulation, comfort with uncertainty, willingness to appear foolish, ability to persist through boredom, strategic focus despite interesting distractions. These complementary strengths transform raw intelligence into genuine capability. Fourth, surround yourself with people who value more than your intellect. When your social world affirms other dimensions of your humanity, you naturally develop beyond the narrow confines of cognitive ability. Seek relationships where your character, your compassion, your creativity, and your courage matter more than your intelligence. Fifth, commit to embodied practice rather than endless preparation. Set clear parameters for when research and analysis end and implementation begins. Create accountability structures that ensure you don't substitute understanding for action. Develop metrics that measure tangible progress rather than intellectual comprehension. Sixth, recognize that mastery requires seasons of apparent intellectual stagnation. The plateau isn't a sign of failure. It's an inevitable phase in the development of expertise. Learn to find meaning in the repetitive practice that deepens skill rather than constantly seeking novel intellectual stimulation. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, clarify your authentic definition of success. The intelligent person often absorbs external metrics unconsciously, pursuing achievement in domains valued by others rather than those that align with their deepest values. True success emerges from authentic alignment, not external validation. The painful truth is that intelligence, for all its advantages, guarantees very little about life outcomes. It's a potential force multiplier, but only when combined with these other crucial factors we've discussed. Look around at the truly remarkable lives you encounter. You'll find that raw cognitive horsepower correlates far less with meaningful achievement than qualities like persistence, focus, emotional equilibrium, social intelligence, and authentic alignment. This isn't to diminish the value of intelligence. It's to properly contextualize it within a broader understanding of human capability and flourishing. Your intellectual gifts remain precious, but they function best as servants to your deeper purpose rather than masters of your identity. The most fulfilled, intelligent people I know have made peace with this reality. They've learned to hold their intelligence lightly, to deploy it strategically, to complement it with other strengths, and to value it appropriately without overvaluing it obsessively. Their intelligence serves their humanity rather than defining it. And in this integration, they find not just the external success that once eluded them, but something far more valuable, a sense of wholeness that transcends achievement entirely. So yes, you're smart. That's a beautiful thing. But now the real question emerges. What will you do with that intelligence? Will you remain trapped in the paradoxes we've explored? Or will you develop the wisdom to use your intelligence as the powerful tool it's meant to be? The choice, as always, remains yours. And that very freedom, to choose how you relate to your own gifts, might be the most profound intelligence of all. Thank you for walking through this exploration with me today. If something in this discussion resonated with your experience, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you found value in these ideas, consider subscribing to The Catharsis for more philosophical explorations of the contradictions we all navigate in our quest for meaningful lives. Until next time, remember, your intelligence is a gift, but what you do with that gift, that's where your unique story truly begins.